On this day in 1918, what was then called the Great War, what later came to be known as World War I, came to an end. As most everyone knows, it was at 11 a.m., the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month, that the armistice was signed and fighting stopped. So many combatants, but even more non-combatants, died in that conflict that many Allied nations established a day of remembrance. Originally called Armistice Day, which the French still call it, some countries now call it Remembrance Day, while we in the United States call it Veterans Day. But whatever you call it, it is a day worth pausing for. Hello, I'm Stuart Baskin, pastor of First Presbyterian Church of Tyler, Texas, and this is your daily devotional for Friday, November 11th, 2022. In the summer and fall of 1918, after European countries had been slugging it out for 4 brutal years, the American Expeditionary Force, under the command of General John Pershing, arrived in force and began taking part in the final push to defeat Germany. Though the United States had formally declared war in April of 1917, it really wasn't until a year later that American troops began arriving in large numbers. Among the roughly 2 million troops to arrive in France that summer was a young second lieutenant from Cameron, Texas, named James Baskin. Just 23 years old when he shipped over, he observed his 24th birthday on the front lines of the Meuse-Argonne offensive in eastern France, having fought earlier in the Saint-Mihiel offensive. Lieutenant Baskin commanded a machine gun company, which would have made him and his little company of soldiers targets of gunners from across the lines. Between gas attacks, artillery bombardments, and the back and forth of infantry attacks, the middle of the line that fall was not a safe place to be. In fact, it was the second deadliest campaign in American history, with over 26,000 Americans killed. Fortunately for me, Lieutenant Baskin survived the war. He was my grandfather. A few years later, he and my grandmother would welcome the first of 3 sons, my father. Now, none of us grandchildren ever knew our grandfather, as he died of cancer in the late 1940s. Like a lot of veterans, though, he apparently didn't talk much about his experiences in the war. No stories that I know of have really come down to us. But there is one piece of equipment that has come down to us, and it's in my possession, and that is his helmet. My grandfather's helmet is rusted and corroded, and the leather straps inside the helmet are nearly gone. But there is one part of it that always gives me pause. There is a noticeable dent in it where a piece of shrapnel hit him. I suppose that but for that helmet, I would not be here today. I don't know a lot about my grandfather, but I do know that he was a regular guy from a small Texas town with a young wife and a future he looked forward to. The reason I talk about him today is because people like him are the reason we observe Veterans Day. Like a lot of guys his age, he was willing to do his part when the nation called, but I am sure he would just as soon have stayed home and tended his farm. But he didn't. He joined. He left home. He trained for war. He got on board of a troop transport and traveled to a distant shore and put himself in harm's way. And he almost certainly watched comrades die horrible deaths, not because there was an immediate threat to their homes and families, but just because their country called. Let's be clear. We Christians do not glorify war. Like most high-ranking military officers I have known, we would rather avoid it if at all possible. But it is not always possible. And when war becomes a necessity, regular people who could be doing 1,000 other things step up to the plate and put their lives on the line. So while we don't glorify war, we do honor those who put themselves on the line. As General William Tecumseh Sherman so aptly put it, war is hell. It truly is. It is nothing to wish for. but sometimes it is something the few must rise to. So on this Veterans Day, no matter your views concerning war, it is worth our while to thank those who answer this particular call to service. Now may God continue to bless you and keep you in all that you do this day and in all the days ahead.